Hello, and thank you for joining me today. My name is Charles Penn. I am Cameroonian-born African, currently residing in the United States. I practice anesthesiology. I'm a medical doctor, but I decided to start this podcast to talk about issues mainly affecting Africa. The reason I'm doing this now is because the world order has basically reshuffled quite a bit over the past couple of years. And greed essentially seems to be dictating what happens in the world. Solidarity is at an all-time low. And some of the things that you hear coming out of Africa recently, or echoing out of Africa recently, have to do with Pan Africanism and collaboration amongst African nations. The reason this has been going on is because, African countries, as you know, have suffered a lot when it comes to exploitation from Western nations. Shortly after World War II, there was this attempt by the United States at globalization. And this was meant to promote world cooperation. It was meant to promote cooperation between nations from a political standpoint, from an economic standpoint. It was meant to promote global interdependence. And the whole idea, at least the whole idea that the United States preached at the time, was that if countries were interdependent, there would be less incentive on the nationalism that led to the first two world wars. But in hindsight, this was more so a way of the United States establishing its hegemony, right? Because shortly after World War II, the US came up with establishing NATO, establishing the United Nations. NATO was basically sort of a military cooperation, and the United Nations was supposed to promote peace, was supposed to promote security in the world. But you look back at what has happened since then. The United States has basically, through NATO, and somewhat through the United Nations, pushed this agenda of Western capitalistic democracy, right? Like they have pushed Western culture on every other country in the world. And now nations like in Africa have grown to be dependent on this Western style of consumerism that now fuels the greed that goes on in these countries. There is a voice that is being echoed outside of Africa that has to do with Pan Africanism. And, I think that this is the hope for Africa right now. Because with the Western style consumerism in African countries, we have gotten to the point where even the African countries that are well off, like South Africa, Uganda, Kenya, even these countries let greed fuel whatever agenda it is that they have with interacting with not only Western nations, but with other African, especially other African countries. And so we have gotten to the point where Pan-Africanism has to be the hope, it has to be the voice. So there are the famous people like Kwame Nkrumah who talked about Africa as a whole is not or ever going to be free unless every single African country is free. And Thomas Sankara, who talked about, uniting African nations and uniting Africans collaborating and working together as a whole. So it starts in your country, but it expands. It expands to other countries around you. The reason why this is so important right now is because with the world advancing in globalization, the continent of Africa seems to be going backwards, which is sad because Africa as a continent is one of the most richest continents when it comes to possession or concentration of natural resources. So if you have this much natural resources, but yet your citizens are amongst the poorest in the world, there is a disconnect somewhere. And if we continue to let greed fuel our agenda, it's not really going to change. And so we have to kind of pivot away from that and think about collaboration as African nations. So a couple of things that I'm going to talk about today have to do with this new Western-style set world order that is currently going on in Africa. The conflict between the Democratic Republic of Congo and armed militias in the DRC, mainly M23, but as you know from reports that have been put forth by the United Nations, the Rwandan government, despite its continuous insistence that it does not support M23, has been shown to support this group, right? So recently there was the agreement that was brokered by the United States between Congo and Rwandan government. So this was done in Washington, D.C., and it involved the Rwandan foreign minister, the foreign minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And they came to Washington, D.C. June 27th, this is almost a month ago, and agreed to cessation of hostilities, whatever that means. And this was basically meant to stop the genocide that has been going on in the DRC. But you look at the agreement, it makes you wonder if this is actually going to hold, because the one of the main armed militias that's perpetrating this genocide, M23, basically came out and said that this peace deal had nothing to do with them. And again, the peace deal doesn't really mention what happens to this militia or what they are supposed to do. Does the hostility stop? Does the killing stop? I really doubt it. It has not stopped. They're still doing what they have been doing in the Congo for many years. They've killed thousands of people in the Congo. They have committed so many human rights violations according to the UN Security Council, including raping women, killing children, using children to commit atrocities in this region. And while they're doing this, it's like the conflict, and the reason why Rwanda continues to back this conflict, even though it says that it's defending its national interest in the region, it uses this conflict as a way to loot resources out of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And it comes back to support this, like, we are African nations. Like, Rwanda is an African nation that happens to be well off when you compare it to the Democratic Republic of Congo. They have gone through similar things. They have gone through a genocide in 1994, where, thousands of Rwandan citizens were killed. And so you have experienced this, and you're not learning from your history. You turn and perpetrate it on your fellow African brothers because they're not your fellow countrymen. This does not go along with the idea of Pan Africanism. And you might think, as the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, that your country is safe. You're doing this in a foreign country, but at the end of the day, you're not ever really going to be free with Western influence in Africa, the power of Western influence in Africa. You're never really going to be free if Congo is not free. So the suffering of Congo is the suffering of Rwanda, whether you see it now or not. So everybody is currently looking at the situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo right now, and M23 saying that this peace deal has nothing to do with them. So, they are not going to stop whatever it is that they have been doing. There is I don't know if I would even call it a glimmer of hope, because there are current talks about a potential agreement that will be reached between M23 and the Democratic Republic of Congo, and this is supposed to be facilitated by Qatar and Doha. It makes you question what precedent this is even setting, because holding peace talks with a group like M23, with a militia like M23, legitimizes this group. And with the atrocities that they've committed, the human rights violations that they have committed, it makes you question how a group like this can commit all of these human rights violations with impunity and then just come to the table and have diplomatic relations or diplomatic talks. So they've killed a lot of people, they have raped a lot of women, they have, caused a lot of instability in the Congo, and now they're going to sit down and have diplomatic talks about ending hostilities. Like, where is the retribution? Where is the retribution? Like, the people in the Congo are looking at this and saying, where is the retribution? And whatever other armed militia looks at this and say, okay, well, it is easy to pick up arms and commit these atrocities, because after you do so, you're just going to be rewarded with diplomatic talks and peace talks. And so I think that that's a very dangerous precedent that is setting. There has never been a time where African nations really need to stand up and speak up for each other. When you look at this, you have to speak up. Congo has gone through a lot. And it's not only Congo, it's a lot of other African countries. And it coming back again to the peace talks between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Rwandan defense forces that were fighting alongside M23. There've been a lot of supply of resources, air drones, missile defense systems that have been supplied by Rwanda to M23, but yet they continue to say that they're not supporting this militia. And then you create a situation where you're fighting amongst yourselves, and then you invite a Western nation to come in and help broker a peace deal. But you've created this situation yourselves, and you've made favorable conditions where Western powers can come in and exploit natural resources, because this security for minerals deal, essentially, security for minerals deal is what this was, because now the U.S., through brokering this peace deal, then gains access to the diamonds in the DRC, gains access to the cobalt mines, to the copper mines, to the tantalum mines in the DRC. And a peace deal that probably is not even going to work, because again, as we mentioned, M23, which is the main militia, was not even included in the talks of the peace deal. It begs the question: what does the Congo actually get out of this? From the potential millions and billions of dollars of minerals that they are going to surrender for exploitation by the United States. It's the same kind of deal that's going on in Africa, and it's very frustrating because it's not only in Rwanda and the DRC, it's, countries like Uganda. Uganda basically is doing the same thing. It's sending troops into the Congo. And Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo have military alliance, but Uganda then took it upon itself to deploy troops to the eastern part of the DRC to again make this condition and this situation more unstable than it actually already is, for the same reason, exploiting resources. So as African nations, we were primed with Western culture and Western style consumerism that has now fueled the greed that is going on in different African nations. And this greed drives this African nation, it drives the governments of these African nations and their interactions with their other African counterparts. And it seems to be taking us away from collaboration and Pan Africanism and African solidarity. So you look at countries like Uganda, you look at countries like Rwanda, you look at countries like Kenya that are well off to a certain extent compared to other poorer countries in Africa. And you think to yourself, like, what are they actually doing? You know, what are they actually doing to make the situation in Africa better? So at the end of the day, at the end of the day, we can't actually depend on our government. So it falls on us to speak up when these atrocities are being committed, and to have voices and to take our own economic futures, our own political futures in our hands, instead of letting these multinational corporations come in and dictate agenda in countries, in our countries in Africa. It's time for us to stand up and speak up and have a voice, take our destiny in our hands. And so that is why the current wave of Pan-Africanism becomes so important right now. And again, I mentioned these countries that are so, that are well off to a certain extent. And the reason that I say we cannot depend on their governments to help is because the governments have, again, has let greed fuel their agenda, and they've let power go to their heads. They don't seem to be giving back this power to their people. They don't seem to have the best interest of their people at heart, right? Take Uganda. You have somebody in Uganda like General Museveni, who is holding on to power, has been holding on to power for a very long time. And, he would silence his political rivals and silence any sort of dissent that comes up in the country. He initially got rid of the term limits in his country so he could continue running forever. And then recently also got rid of the age limit that was initially there for how old you could be to run for president. So he intends to rule the country forever. And when you do that, you're not really giving power back to your people. And if the governments don't give power back to the people have to take this power. And it's not, I am not inciting any violence. I am just saying the best way to have the power back for yourself is having the voice and speaking up when atrocities are being committed. It's the same thing that's going on in Kenya with William Ruto, right? He is trying to hold on to power forever. He is using the police force to silence dissent in his country. There were riots the past couple of weeks in Kenya with people dissatisfied with government policy. And what happens? Police brutality becomes an issue, right? Because if you speak up, you run the risk in Kenya right now of being killed. People have been killed for speaking up and standing up for the violence that is going on there. So, when things like this happen, we should call on other African countries, or, the ideal scenario, or the ideal scenario in a situation like this would be, Western powers. When we talk about solidarity, it would be Western powers deciding to not hold diplomatic relationships with this corrupt governments. But that's not going to happen because, if we would stoop as low as having diplomatic relations with a militia such as M23, what's going to stop countries from having diplomatic relations with a corrupt government like the one in Uganda or the corrupt government like the one in Kenya? That is the short-sightedness that keeps us where we are. So when we don't have that solidarity, when we don't respect human dignity, we are always going to be suffering as a collective. We are always going to be suffering as a collective. We're never going to get to where we're striving to get to with fueling the agenda of collaboration in the world. So again, diplomacy with corrupt governments does not lead us to where we need to be from a Pan-Africanism standpoint. It's only going to create situations where it becomes very easy for exploitation to happen. The exploitation of natural resources in the DRC is going to keep happening because we created that environment. The exploitation of gold in Sudan is going to keep happening because we created that environment. For a long time, the fighting in Sudan has just made it possible for illegal gold to be smuggled outside of Sudan to the United Arab Emirates. Like the UAE has 0 gold mines, but it somehow is the world leader in gold trading. Where does this gold come from? It is gold that is smuggled out of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And if we can't stand together as African nations, if we cannot stand together in solidarity, we are only going to be creating the situations where Western powers come in and exploit these resources, and we are going to remain poor as a continent. You might have countries that gain a little bit of an edge, like we mentioned, but if these countries don't turn around and uplift other countries in Africa, if Africa doesn't form a union that can stand on the world stage and demand respect, then all of these other African countries are just wasting their time because the forces that come out of the West are too powerful for any African country to fight on its own. I want to keep reflecting on this famous saying by Kwame Nkrumah that Africa is not free until every single African country is free. And the new wave of Pan-Africanism, that is where that should take us back to. And echo the voices of Ibrahim Traore and what he's trying to do in Burkina Faso, because that essentially is going to create a blueprint for what a lot of these other African countries have to do. And the collaboration that these African countries have to have in order to stand the test of time. To people like Kwame Nkrumah, to people like Thomas Sankara, to people like Nelson Mandela in South Africa, these are the people that we have to look to and listen to when it comes to forging a new path for Africa as a continent. Africa as a continent is the richest continent when it comes to natural resources, but more importantly, investing in human capital in Africa has to be one of the most fundamental things, because human capital is the most important capital, and Africa seems to have the youngest and most vibrant form of this capital, and we're letting it go to waste. The human capital in Africa is at a state right now where it's, most of the people are essentially non-employable. And we need to change that. We need to invest in the people in Africa. And the way we do that is through African solidarity. It's through this Pan-Africanism. It's through the young generation of Africa actually taking their future in their hands and speaking up for the corruption that is going on, and changing the narrative. That is the only way that we change the narrative. hope to continue to talk with you guys on ways that we can advance ourselves as Africans, in ways that we can kind of build ourselves up as a united nation of Africa. And just let me know what you think. Let me know what your opinions are on some of these issues. And we're going to continue to follow some of these issues as they continue to unfold. As I said, next month is when the potential talks between M23 and Congo would happen. And my heart goes out to my brothers and sisters in Congo who have suffered for so long, who have lost loved ones and lost people that are important to them. I hope that something comes of this. I still am of the belief that M23 needs to be held accountable. These diplomatic talks are not the way to go. They need to be held accountable for the atrocities that they have committed in this country, for the destabilization that they have caused in this country. But my heart continues to go out to the people of Congo, and I hope that the situation there gets better as we continue to watch what is going on. So thank you so much for joining me today, and I will see you next time.